What I want to talk about is actually how we as product leaders can help our teams to set up their product discovery structures for success. And I chose this topic because I feel that there's a lot of fuss around product discovery in the recent years. But based on my experience and also what I hear from friends in the industry, it doesn't really find its way into the day-to-day life of product development teams. But product delivery work, so the actual doing, still gets much more attention in the day-to-day life of product development teams. And I personally think that that's a big problem, because if product discovery work isn't really balanced out with delivery work, then the teams might be popping out lots and lots of features and light speed, and like everything is optimized in the way how we run sprints, how we do quality assurance, everything around release management. But these features in the end might not really make the customers happy and might not lead to the expected business outcomes. So I'm actually strongly advocating for a much more balanced work where discovery and delivery gets more attention and more time from the teams. But I was actually wondering, where is this paradox coming from? Because I think everyone nowadays knows that it's very worthwhile spending a lot of time on discovery work, especially for PMs, but it still tends to kind of lag behind. And my assumption is that this is due to the fact that for delivery work, there are all these standardized frameworks like Scrum and Kanban that one can study, and even rather junior teams can basically have something to hold on and how to get started in terms of ceremonies and role descriptions and all that. And I think nothing like that really exists for discovery work, at least nothing that I'm aware of. And I think it's probably also near impossible to define a very detailed product discovery framework, because I think discovery as compared to delivery is much more dependent on your industry, your business model, your product stage. That being said, I think that there are a couple of considerations that really every product development team should discuss when they define how they want to work together. And I think in our role as product leaders, we can definitely help our teams and point them at these considerations so they do not tap into the fallacy of forgetting discovery over delivery work and, I don't know, spending hours discussing how to best estimate a JIRA ticket rather than really considering how to involve customers into the process, for example. So what I did is that I've put together the 4 high-level considerations that I find most important and that have helped me in past coaching sessions with my PMs to help them ramp up discovery work and really give it the attention it deserves. And yes, I quickly want to run through these 4 considerations and then hear if you agree, if you've made different experiences, or if you have anything to add. So the first consideration is to really think about the discovery tools that the team might be using. And with discovery tools, I really mean every kind of method or technique that a team can apply to identify a problem or a suitable solution. So, I don't know, exploratory user interviews, running a CRM campaign to validate an idea, or developing a prototype and do some co-creation with users. And yeah, I think that the best teams that I know, they really have this big toolbox and they always choose the right tool depending on the problem or the challenge at hand. But also based on my experience, a lot of teams somehow tend to always fall back to the same method, either because out of routine, they just love this method, or because they don't really know what is there and they're not creative in that sense. So for example, at Babbel, I feel like we are using a CRM email campaign and a landing page way too often to validate an idea. And to avoid this, I usually encourage teams to really start building up a library of discovery tools. At Novice, for example, we had really set up a workshop series where each time someone in the team, or also sometimes myself, presented a certain discovery method, and then we discussed it as a team, and then we added it to the library. And that was very helpful, because then sometimes in retrospectives, the teams were pulling out this library again, looked at it, and really challenged if they were using the full library of methods that is out there. And it also really helped us to onboard new members to the team that could look into this library and really understand how discovery work is done over here, and could also contribute, of course, with new tools. The second consideration that I find important is to think about how you can really integrate and involve every team member into discovery work. I think usually for PMs and also designers, that's quite straightforward, but for engineers, the way how they are getting involved is usually not so straightforward, because they are still spending the majority of their time on delivery work. But I think it is important to really consider how are they integrated, because if you do not consider it consciously, then it usually never happens. And yeah, I think that, or I've actually seen two ways that worked really well, how to consider, how to involve engineers. And yeah, I usually encourage my teams to consider if either of these ways would work. So one option, I think, is that you have this engineering lead or an engineering manager that is really actively taking part in discovery work with a really notable time invest. And I think the alternative is that you really try to identify and just ask around who of the other engineers would be interested in taking part in discovery, and then you involve them either on a rotating base. So I don't know, every other month, another engineer is really actively taking part in discovery, or you kind of split it up per initiative. Yeah, and with active participation, I don't just mean that the engineers come in at the end of a discovery cycle when the solution is already sketched out and they just kind of contribute with their feasibility lens. But I really mean that they take part in interviews, that they take part in ideation sessions and really help to define the prototypes. A third consideration that I find important is to consider how to involve customers into your product development efforts. And here, I think it's all about involving them continuously rather than on a project base. Because I think, well, you're taking product decisions almost every day, then you should really try to make sure that you talk to a customer at least once per week. And the big difficulty that I've seen teams facing here is how to recruit these customers in an efficient and automated manner. And I think here it's really all about getting creative. I think, for example, in B2B companies, I think it's very worthwhile to set up a lead user group. So a pool of customers that agree that they are kind of involved into development efforts frequently. And this is something that we did at Navis, and it worked out really, really well. So we basically, ask a selected number of customers if they wanted to join this lead user panel. They even had to sign a contract for that. And we were quite astonished how many people actively applied to be part of this lead user panel. They really saw it as something that flattered them to be there. And then it was super easy to kind of set up these weekly user tests and interviews. And you obviously have to offer those customers something in return. And we were quite surprised at Navis that they weren't really interested in kind of a reduced subscription fee or something like that. But the one thing that interested them a lot was getting a sneak peek into our product roadmap in return for kind of taking part in these user research activities. And last but not least, I think, a fourth considerations that I always recommend my teams to keep in mind is to consider how you really integrate discovery discussions into your day-to-day work in forms of routines or ceremonies. And here I think I usually find it very helpful to think about how you really combine delivery and discovery ceremonies rather than kind of setting up another kind of round of meetings in parallel. And at Babbel, for example, we have one team where discovery work is really brought into each and every Scrum ceremony that the team is running. So they have a daily where both discovery and delivery work is presented. They have kind of this Kanban board where kind of all the discovery tasks are tracked that they can show up in the daily, so that the whole team is being kept in the loop. They run retrospectives where they align on both discovery and delivery processes and how to improve them. In refinement sessions, they don't only bring in user stories that are almost fully defined, but really bring in stories that are right at the beginning, so that all engineers can contribute and still shape them. And during the sprint planning, the PM really gives an update of the upcoming discovery work. And I think this team has really done a great job of making sure that everyone in the team feels responsible for defining what the product should be and where to focus on. I think in some, there is definitely no standard way of doing continuously product discovery, but I think it's very, very worthwhile to point your teams at least these 4 considerations. There are probably many more, and help them to try to formalize discovery work a little bit more, so it cannot easily slip off the table in the day-to-day delivery work. Now I'm quite curious to hear if you agree, if you disagree, if you have made different experience or anything to add.
This is really interesting, and I actually just wanted to add, I had developed a really similar partnership program within Dr. Lee to get doctors to help us develop the software. And even before that, I just wanted to say, like, one of the things that I find teams like really struggle with the most is taking time to do interviews, but qualitative interviews that take time and really force you to get out of your office and get out of your bubble and get out of your bias of knowing what the solution is and spending a lot of time with people. Obviously, it's not as easy depending on what your market is. And often one of the things that I really encourage people is to get out of your own way, and like really sometimes technology is not the answer. Sometimes you shouldn't do the thing that you wanted to do because it's actually going to create more problems. And that is often a thing that we struggle with within product, is we want to get, we want to build things because that's that's what we do, right? But oftentimes it's not the tech is not a solution all the time.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I've also made this experience that people are sometimes a little like afraid even to do a user interview. And user interview sounds like something like, oh, I need to know exactly how to do that. And I always encourage my teams, like even a 5-minute talk to someone who might not 100% fall into our product, into our target group, but is just a friend of yours who has used a similar product. This can be considered an interview, and try to do that as often as possible.
Yeah, I have a question. I think Navis and Babbel are both differently targeted companies and products. So one is for B2B, one is for B2C. So how do you consider taking users when it comes to B2C markets, such as for Babbel, where users are very volatile and churn rate is higher than the B2B markets? So how do you take care of those things?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I think at Babbel, we really, we had a close relationship to customers. We had account managers that we could ask to bring in customers. We had this set group of people that we always turn to. And at Babbel, obviously people churn much more often, but there what we're trying to do is to recruit people through our product. So there's a little pop-up from time to time that asks people, hey, do you want to join this group? We just have a much bigger pool. I think we have 1,500 users who kind of sign up to participating in development efforts. We also have kind of a Facebook group with like very active users where we're also always turning to. So it's a different way. I think you have to have kind of a much bigger pool of people that you reach to, and not this kind of small group that you can always turn to. So a different way to set this up and to recruit users.
Yeah. So just a follow-up question on that. So do you have a curation process for larger set of people when you say, okay, we have 1,500 users, giving us feedback about or giving us future features. So how do you curate that process? And how do you align those changes to your strategic roadmap?
Yeah, good question. Yes, we do have a curation process that we might also add a specific question to this group, so that we basically make sure that we're getting the right people in for interviews, like the right language combination in this case, or the right kind of motivation behind that. So we have a couple of things that people need to check before we involve them into interviews. And and that changes depending on the question that we're trying to answer at the moment in discovery work.
Just one thing, and that is when you to add here, when you reach out to users and you seek information from users' data, basically, you don't necessarily go and try to get the product that you need to build from them. What you're trying to understand is what are the problems and points of traction that they have. And then you take that and you try to build products for it or solutions for that. Unless we're talking about really usability testing of like really specific UIs that you want to test on users, which is a product, you focus on problems.
Yeah, exactly. I think these generative user interviews that you do once a week, it's really to understand, okay, what problems are they have? What is the one big thing that we're hearing over and over again and that we should focus on solving?
I see also in my organization that there's a tendency also in the product people to go into delivery mode. And my assumption is that it's because usually delivery topics, challenges are more urgent, while the discovery are important. And I wanted to ask what your ratio is between product people and engineering. I find my staff very involved in having basically to work on delivering, allowing good delivery. And I wonder if this is a ratio problem or maybe a leadership and priority problem.
Yeah, super good question. I think our the normal ratio that we have at Babbel is usually like 5 to 7 engineers, then 1 product designer, 1 product manager, and at Babbel we always have a learning expert in there. And then depending on what kind of product we're working on, sometimes a content person or something like that. But yeah, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the product manager specifically can really spend 50% of the time at least, ideally more, on discovery, because the engineers are really well self-managed. Because I think sometimes there's this tendency that the engineers don't take any decision by themselves, and for the smallest thing they're always kind of reaching out to the product manager, and we're really trying to get the engineers to be a bit more independent so that the product manager and designer can really focus on discovery work. We have a lot of kind of discussions before the sprint to make sure during the delivery work that there are not too many kind of questions coming up again. But we also make sure that we have, as I said, like 1 engineer who like focuses also with 50% on discovery, which is weird for some teams. Like sometimes when I joined Babbel, they were like, oh, whoa, why should this is not my job. But I think it's very important to make sure that they also see it as their job, that being involved in an ideation session is something that they should spend time on. So I don't think it's necessary that you just add more product people there, but just that you kind of free up the PMs and the designers of being too involved in delivery work.
So do you have 1 engineering lead per team also?
Yeah, we have 1 engineering manager, and that is probably what also makes it easy, because usually the engineering manager is this person that is really involved in discovery work.
There's one thing that relates to why people fall back onto delivery instead of discovery. It's because it's easier, at least in their heads. And sometimes there's the urgency to make sure that the engineers are busy. And we need to, we need to make sure they're delivering stuff. And we prepare all of this, and then we go to discovery, and they need to do some more stuff, and the whole vicious cycle starts. Not necessarily always the case, but I've experienced it myself a few times.
Yeah, what you said, I fully agree. This like feeding the beast product management. Like we have these 5 engineers, they need to stay busy. We just had that at Babbel when we decided, okay, we're taking our product offline and we need to find a new thing to work on. And then the engineers and also our engineering manager got super nervous about, but now we don't usually, like in discovery, you always need to be a couple of weeks ahead. And but then we started to involve like the whole engineering team much more into discovery and figured out that they are so creative and had so many good ideas and that they actually enjoyed doing this work much more than also many of them expected. So, but I agree. I think that there is always this fear of the engineers not knowing what to do next.
One thing I'd like to contest, and it also aligns to that you said early on, that it also aligns to how I think we can structure this to succeed more, is when you mentioned that Scrum or Kanban or these things are more geared towards delivering something that is known from the beginning, as opposed to discovery that you need to time box or do other things about. I think that one of the key values in general is that we should always be in a mode where we're looking for information, right? One of the key principles in Agile would be that information has value. And whether you're looking to deliver a feature that, for example, relies on finding a third-party solution, or, you know, when we set up vouchers, for example, in Omio, where I worked before, you start with something that's really simple, right? You start with an MVP that involves a lot of concierge services. You can start with fake door tests. You can do a lot of things to realize whether what you want to do has value, and being able to shift from it is really important. And that kind of goes back to how we plan and how we set planning up, whether we're focusing on promising a delivery of a specific feature, or are we promising on improving a metric in the future? I think when product owns an improvement over a metric, it gives them a few things. One of them is the flexibility to very quickly experiment and realize, well, this isn't working, but I have 5 other ideas to give a shot at. So this is one. And when we talk about how we said, for example, how did we involve engineers in interviews, for example, or user research, then one thing that we did that worked really well, and I like what you're saying about getting evangelists or people who are excited about the product, but it has a lot of risk bringing people in over and over again who already know the product, because you want to onboard new users. And I think in a lot of companies like Babbel, new user value has a lot more emphasis rather than features that existing users will focus on, retention and so on. Has value, but you want people who don't know the product really well. In Omio, we did focus on bringing in people who've never seen the product before. We did a lot of open recruiting for it, rewarded with, I think, 20 euros for people who came in for interviews. We also sent UX researchers to train stations and bus stations. So our product is a 2-sided marketplace for travel. And we videoed that. And one thing that was really cool that we did was whenever there was an interview that was being done, whether in-house or elsewhere, we had a viewing room. So we said, we're doing user research, and there was a room with popcorn and sofas, and people would come in and sit and watch the interviews while they were taking place, and they were streamed out as well. A lot of engineers became more involved with those, and they were going on, and that was really nice.
Well, yeah, maybe one comment on that. I fully agree. You shouldn't only focus on people who are already your customers, but also people outside. And we do that at Babbel. In the B2B world, that's much harder, because then you always get in conflict with your sales department, who are like, no, we want to close a deal here. You're not going to do any user research with them. So I think this is the struggle I was always facing in the B2B world.
Churned users are a great resource, people who churned. B2B or B2B.
Yeah, that's true. But when you are very early stage in B2B, then you're doing a good job, then you don't have churned users yet. So that was our issue.
I'm just curious, you said like putting the developers into the discovery phase. Is there like a specific characteristic that comes with the developer that works best from your experience, or is rotating in the team works better in terms of getting that discovery mode, like basically into the full team, let's say? What is your experience there?
Well, my experience is that often you have front-end engineers who are really interested in discovery work, but I also had kind of DevOps people who really liked it. So I think the main thing that we used to do and it worked well was just asking them. And then there are these people that are, yeah, I love that, I want to participate, and others are like, no, I don't want to do that. I love writing code, and then just not making it force anyone to kind of do that all the time, but rather
go with motivation, basically. Like whoever is the most motivated might work best in that setup. Yeah. Cool, thanks.
Do we really do any discovery in my company? I was thinking for a long time, and then I realized, oh, we do it, but we just do it in a different way. So how I'm doing is like, we have the sprints, and like we have a tight sprint of 4, let's say 4 continuous sprint. So we know what we are going to do in those 4 sprints. But then I have a 6 months and a year plan that is very vague. So I say customer was asking for, let's say, analytics dashboard. I don't know what is that. So I put a research engineer there, and that person is finding out what the problem is and how are we going to solve it. So that process is running in parallel. And if we find something which we can quickly fix and quickly build, we put that in a sprint. So we are doing discovery, but I never thought like, how are we aligning these two, discovery and delivery, together? Here it is just long term. That's where we are doing slow like discovery, I would say. And then parallelly, we are doing what we discovered as delivery. And I think Marty Kagan, the Silicon Valley product group guy, he also talks about this 2D model, discovery and delivery, discovery and delivery. And he does it even faster. He says like, do it in a sprint itself, develop, and then go and discover whether this is what customer was looking for or something else, and then develop. So that's, yeah, interesting. Yeah. Thank you for the talk.
Cool. Yeah, super interesting.